Boys and girls, today we are going to be talking about a reading strategy that real readers use while they are reading to help them understand the story better. This strategy is called making inferences. Now, an inference is when readers use their schema and the evidence from the book to determine something about the story that is not specifically written. Now remember, our schema is what we already know, or our background knowledge. So, when we make an inference, we use our schema and evidence from the text and the pictures in order to determine our inference. Making inferences while you read is important because it helps us to be better at understanding everything that happens in the story. So to do this today, we're going to use our hand as a tool to remember 5 different things that we can make inferences about while we read. So why do you think that we would use a hand to remember the 5 different reasons? That's right, because our hand has 5 fingers on it. So on our chart, we have a big hand, and we're going to write each of the different things to make inferences about on one of the fingers. So our first one is who. So we have who, and then we have what, then we have when, where, and why. So these are the 5 different things that we're going to remember while we try to make inferences as we read. So our book today is The Mitten, written and illustrated by Jan Brett. Excuse me. So we're going to start with our inferences on the very front cover. So my first inference is that our story is going to have animals in it. I think that our story is going to be about animals because there are all these wild animals in the picture on our cover. So that's my first inference, and I'm going to write that with the who part. I'm going to say animals in the story. And I'm going to draw a box around that to show that it's our inference. And then I'm going to put the evidence with that and just say that there are animals on the cover. And we're going to circle our evidence. Let's see, do you think we can make any more inferences just from our front cover? I think that the animals in our story are confused because they don't know what a mitten is. And I'm gonna say that because they're all looking at this mitten and they look confused. They look like they don't know what it is. So with our what, we are going to say that animals do not know what a mitten is. We're going to box that, and we're going to put our evidence is that they look confused. Alright, and lastly, on our front cover, I'm going to infer that our story takes place in the winter time. Now, it doesn't tell me with the words that it takes place during the winter time, but I'm going to guess that because there is snow in our picture, and because our title is The Mitten, which is what we wear when it's cold outside, that our story takes place in the winter time. So we're going to write our inference that it is winter. Box our inference, and then we are going to write our evidence that there is snow and we wear mittens in the cold. All right, now let's move on to our story. our story is The Mitten, which is a Ukrainian folk tale adapted and illustrated by Jan Brett. Once there was a boy named Nicky who wanted his new mittens made from wool as white as snow. At first, his grandmother, Baba, did not want to knit white mittens. If you drop one in the snow, she warned, you'll never find it. But Nicky wanted snow white mittens, and finally, Baba made them. Now I'm going to infer that Baba made the mittens for Nicky because she loves him, because he's her grandson. So for the why, we are going to say that Baba made the mittens because she loves Nicky. And our evidence for that is in our schema, in our background knowledge, because we know that our grandmothers love us. So that Baba is Nicky's grandmother. She must love him. All right. After she finished, she said, "When you come home, first I will look to see if you are safe and sound. But then I will look to see if you still have your snow white mittens." So off Nicky went, and it wasn't long until one of his new mittens dropped in the snow and was left behind. I'm going to infer that Nicky was not very careful with his new mittens. And I'm going to infer that because the text says that it wasn't long until one of his new mittens dropped in the snow and was left behind. So over here for our what, I'm going to say Nicky was not careful. The evidence for that is the mitten dropped in the snow. A mole, tired from tunneling along, discovered the mitten and burrowed inside. It was cozy and warm and just the right size, so he decided to stay. Now, if there is a mole that burrowed into the mitten, and this looks kind of like it might be a farmhouse, I'm going to infer that our story takes place at a farmhouse near the woods. So let's write that for the where. Story happens at a farmhouse near the woods. And our evidence for that is that there is a farmhouse in our picture, and lots of trees around. Oh, excuse me. A snowshoe rabbit came hopping by. He stopped for a moment to admire his winter coat. It was then that he saw the mitten, and he wiggled it, feet first. The mole didn't think there was enough room for both of them, but when he saw the rabbit's big kickers, he moved over. We're going to stop here and infer, just like at the beginning, that our animals still aren't quite sure what a mitten is for. And I'm going to infer that because they have crawled inside, completely inside the mitten. and that's not how we wear a mitten. So we don't need to write anything because we've already inferred that, but that's just remembering our first inference. So next, a hedgehog came snuffling along. Having spent the day looking under wet leaves for things to eat, he decided to move into the mitten and warm himself. The mole and the rabbit were bumped and jostled, but not being ones to argue with someone covered with prickles, they made room. I'm going to infer that there's not going to be much more room inside our mitten for any more animals. And I think that that is because there are already 3 animals inside one mitten. Excuse me. So we're going to write not much room left. Because in our evidence, there are 3 animals inside. As soon as the hedgehog disappeared into the mitten, a big owl, attracted by the commotion, swooped down. When he decided to move in also, the mole, the rabbit, and the hedgehog grumbled. But when they saw the owl's glinting talons, they quickly let him in. I'm going to infer that the mole, the rabbit, and the hedgehog do not want our owl friend to move into the mitten. And I'm going to say that because our text tells us that they grumbled. And I know that when I grumble, I'm not very happy about something. So over here, for our who, we're going to say that the animals don't want the owl to move in. Almost forgot our box. And our evidence is because the text says that they grumbled. All right, let's keep going. I am going to make an inference on this page before we even read any words. I'm going to use this picture over here to guess that Nicky still doesn't know that he lost his mitten. I'm going to guess that, or infer that, because he's still over here playing in the snow. And you can see there's only one mitten on his belt. So, we're going to put that with the win, because he still hasn't realized it. We're going to say Nicky does not know his mitten is missing. Because he is still playing. All right. Up through the snow appeared a badger. He eyed the mitten and began to climb in. The mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, and the owl were not pleased. There was no room left, but when they saw his diggers, they gave him the thumb. It started snowing, but the animals were snug in the mitten. A waft of warm steam rose in the air, and a fox trotting by stopped to investigate. Just the sight of the cozy mitten made him feel drowsy. The fox poked his muzzle in. When the mole, the rabbit, the hedgehog, the owl, and the badger saw his shiny teeth, they gave the fox lots of room. Now, I'm going to infer that the animals let the fox in because they were scared of him, because the text says that they saw his shiny teeth. So, over here, with our Y, I'm going to say, we're just going to write out here to the side, that the animals are scared of the fox. Because they saw his shiny teeth. scampered by. He spied the mitten all plumped up. Not being one to be left out in the cold, he began to nose his way in. The animals were packed in as tightly as could be, but what animal would argue with a bear? The mitten swelled and stretched. It was pulled and bulged too many times its size, but Baba's good knitting held fast. So I'm going to infer here that because Baba's good knitting held fast, that the mitten still isn't going to rip. And we're going to put that with our what? The mitten won't rip. Because our text tells us that the knitting held fast. We're going to make another picture inference here before we start reading this page and infer that Nicky has just now realized that he is missing one of his mittens. So I think that because he's looking over and he sees that he only has one. And over here he looks very confused that he doesn't know what happened to it. But we're not going to write that one because we've already wrote that he didn't realize it. So along came a meadow mouse, no bigger than an acorn. She wriggled into the one space left and made herself comfortable on top of the great bear's nose. The bear, tickled by the mouse's whiskers, gave an enormous sneeze. Ah, 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 shoo! The force of the sneeze shot the mitten up into the sky and scattered the animals in all directions. On his way home, Nicky saw a white shape in the distance. It was the lost mitten silhouetted against the blue sky. As he ran to catch his snow-white mitten, he saw Baba's face in the window. First, she looked to see if he was safe and sound, and then she saw that he still had his new mittens. Now, boys and girls, I think that Baba looks very confused in this picture because she is holding one regular-sized mitten and one mitten that has been very stretched out. So our last inference for this story is that Baba is confused, and we're going to put this with the Y. Baba is confused because one mitten is bigger. The end. Wow, look at how many inferences we've made about our story. Now, who can remind me what an inference is? That's right, an inference is using our background knowledge or our schema along with the text and the picture evidence that we find in our story to figure out something about what we are reading. Because we have made so many inferences, we have a better understanding of what happened throughout our book, The Mitten. Good job, boys and girls.